Okay, so we've talked about the different types of competitive advantages that a company can pursue, such as cost leadership, either through cost cutting or through cost elimination, or the other types of competitive advantage, differentiation, either through through an economic form of differentiation or a non-economic, that is psychological or social form of differentiation. So we've talked about all those different types of competitive advantage that a company can pursue, but we have not talked about how that competitive advantage can be achieved, where the competitive advantage comes from. And that's the focus, the primary focus of the conceptual tool known as the resource-based view. So let's begin to talk about what are the fundamental underlying assumptions of the resource-based view as a conceptual tool. Well, first, the resource-based view holds that companies are unique combinations of tangible and intangible resources, and that when managed properly, these tangible and intangible resources can be combined to create what's known as capabilities. And it's particular characteristics of those resources and capabilities that determine who has a competitive advantage in an industry and how sustainable that advantage is. What do I mean by characteristics of resources and capabilities? Well, I'm going to get to that in a few moments. I'm going to spend the next part of this lecture talking about that. But for now, just bear in mind that not all resources and capabilities are created equal. Some of them are more valuable for a competitive advantage, and some of them can be more beneficial in terms of sustaining a competitive advantage than others. Just bear in mind, not all resources and capabilities are created equal, and we're going to talk about some of the characteristics of resources and capabilities that can either make them more or less likely to support a sustained competitive advantage in a moment. The other point that the resource-based view is dependent upon is the idea that success is determined by fit. That is, there has to be a fit or a match between the internal resources and capabilities that the company has and the needs of the external market. There has to be a match between what's going on inside the company and what's going on outside the company. The external market's needs determine what are the opportunities and threats in the firm's environment. That is, what might the firm do? The internal resources and capabilities are determining the strengths and weaknesses of the company, and therefore determine what can the firm do. So there's got to be a fit between the opportunities and threats in the external environment as far as what the firm might do, and the resources and capabilities within the firm determining what the firm can do. And how do you achieve that fit? Well, you can either build the very best resources and capabilities that you can to serve the needs of the firm's existing market, or you can choose whichever market makes the best use of the firm's existing resources and capabilities, or some combination of the two. Well, just to briefly illustrate, I think the point here that I'm trying to make is that the variety of different types of resources and capabilities that different firms have is potentially infinite. There is potentially an infinite variety of different resources and capabilities that a firm might use depending upon its industry and its situation within the industry. And so the resource-based view is not like the industry analysis perspective in the sense that there's a simple checklist you can go through of different types of resources. The way there is a simple checklist of threats in the environment in the industry analysis perspective in the Porter 5 Force model. Here, when we're talking about the resource-based view, the variety of potential resources that a company might apply to gain competitive advantage is really infinite. And these resources may be of a tangible type, as you see on the left here, or they may be of an intangible type, as you see here on the right. One of the points I want to make here is that the industry analysis perspective that we've been studying up to this point in the course and the resource-based view that I'm introducing here are somewhat different perspectives on strategy, and they take somewhat different views with somewhat different assumptions. And let me go through some of these different assumptions right now. In the industry analysis view, The assumption is that performance is driven by competition-reducing features of an industry or market. Performance is driven at the level of the industry or market by, all those 5 forces that we discussed in the industry analysis lecture from Porter's 5-force model. And therefore, barriers to competition are due to collective action at the industry or market level, as we saw, for example, in the contrast between the NutraSweet versus Holland Sweetener case and the Cola Wars case. Clearly, the contrast between those two cases illustrates how different the barriers to competition can be at the industry or market level, and what the results of those different barriers to competition can be. The emphasis in the industry analysis view is primarily on generic strategies. And the idea is, from the industry analysis perspective, that profits primarily reflect monopoly power. And so any strategic actions that are taken to enhance monopoly power also tend to hurt public welfare, as I mentioned in the industry analysis lecture. And so from the industry analysis view, what is strategy? From the industry analysis view, strategy is picking the right markets to be in. It's market selection and market positioning. Now, by contrast, let's take a look at the resource-based view. In the resource-based view, the assumption is somewhat different about where performance comes from. The assumption in the resource-based view is that performance comes from the firm level, that performance is driven by each firm's possession of unique value-creating resources with inelastic supply. And I'll talk about in a moment what I mean by inelastic supply. But the idea is that you can't just go out and buy these resources very easily. They're not readily available. And so those firms that have them have an advantage that can create profits and higher performance. So there's a clear distinction between the industry analysis view and the resource-based view as to where performance comes from, whether it's due to competition-reducing features at the level of the industry or market, or whether it's due to barriers to competition at the level of the individual firm through the possession of unique resources with inelastic supply so that other firms can't just go and buy them. There's also a big difference in the assumptions about where barriers to competition come from. In the industry analysis view, as I said a moment ago, barriers to competition are viewed primarily as being driven by collective action at the industry or market level. And in the resource-based view, barriers to competition are viewed primarily as being at the firm level due to the actions of individual firms in investing in resources that can generate profits for them and that other firms can't get their hands on. The emphasis in the resource-based view is on building multiple bases of competitive advantage, as Southwest did, rather than on single generic competitive advantages like cost leadership or differentiation. Now, there's also a difference between the industry analysis view and the resource-based view in their views on what profits are and where profits come from and what they mean. As I said a moment ago, in the industry analysis view, the assumption is that profits can only be gained through the exercise of monopoly power, and therefore any strategic action that's designed to enhance profits will tend to hurt public welfare because it increases monopoly power. Now, in the resource-based view, by contrast, the assumption is that profits are a fair return on the efficiency advantages that firms gain by investing in scarce resources. And so strategic actions, according to the resource-based view, tend to promote public welfare by making the economy as a whole more efficient. And that's a very different view than the industry analysis view. The resource-based view does not rely on monopoly power in thinking about where profits come from. In the resource-based view, profits are not monopoly profits, but efficiency profits, and so therefore are consistent with public welfare, not in contradiction to public welfare. Whereas the industry analysis view says that strategy is all about picking markets and positioning in markets, the resource-based view says that strategy is building capabilities to serve market needs. And that's a different view of what strategy is all about than is reflected in the industry analysis view.